Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures on Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Long. The series of videos that you're watching are designed for students taking my anatomy and physiology courses at Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, Texas. If anyone else out there in YouTube land stumbles across these videos, then you guys know that we're in the coronavirus or COVID-19 shutdown, and all of our face-to-face classes have been switched to online, which is the reason I'm doing this series of videos, to deliver the lectures to my students. Now, if you find them helpful, great. If not, oh well. But they're designed for students taking my class to focus on the topics that I think are important for those people who are destined for the allied health science majors. All right? So this should be, I believe, the 6th lecture in the series of lectures on the sensory nervous system. We've been talking about the general senses. We talked about the senses of olfaction and gustation. We're going to begin the sensations and the sensory physiology of the eyeball. And then we have to do hearing. So we have probably 3 or 4 videos left, if not more. There's a lot of information for the sensory system, and so we're going to do the best we can. This first drawing and this first part of the lecture I'm going to do is really just going to be a lot of the anatomy of the eye. When we understand the anatomy of the eye, then we can start to go into the physiology and into the note set. But for now, you need to get some basic understanding of the anatomy of the eye. This will help for the labs. So I'm going to do 2 different pictures. The first picture I'm going to do is going to show you an anterior view of the eye as it sits in the eyeball. So one of the things you'll notice, I'm going to draw the right eye, so just for reference sake, I'll put a nose over here. One of the things that you'll see when we look at the anatomy of the eye is we have this little fold in the corner here, and then the eyelids come up and down and meet over here, okay? I didn't draw this quite anatomically correct, but give me a little bit of time and I'll get it right. Our eyelids, the fleshy folds that surround the opening where the eyeball are called the eyelids, or they're called palpebra. There's a superior palpebra and an inferior palpebra for each eye. The area where the eyelids meet, these little folds where they meet, are referred to as a canthus. This one is called the medial, this one would be called the lateral canthus, my bad. I'm thinking of where I'm going, not where I'm at. And then right here would be the medial canthus, okay? I'm going to erase my label for the medial canthus because I'm going to need to label another structure right there. But it's right where the 2 eyeballs meet. They're called the canthic folds, or the medial and lateral canthus, okay? Now, we also have a superior and inferior canthic fold, but I'm not going to label those. We're not going to talk about them. Sitting behind your eyeball, your eyelids, or the palpebrae, would be the actual eyeball itself. The eyeball itself has a white part of the eye, which is called the sclera. So when we talk about the sclera, we're really talking about the white part of the eyeball. We're going to go into the layers of the eyeball in just a little bit. Now, if I were to look at the eyeball from a sort of a lateral view, or actually if I sliced it in half and looked at it from a mid-sagittal view, the eyeball would be shaped like this. And we're going to make this drawing again in just a little bit. We're going to make it more detailed where you can see all of what you need to see. But the outer covering of the eye is going to come around like this, and there will be an opening in it through which the optic nerve enters the eyeball, okay? This outer covering out here would be called the sclera, the white part. Now, the sclera is made out of a lot of dense connective tissue. It's collagen fibers, crisscrossing in multiple layers, some running this way, some running this way, some running at angles, many layers of it, which makes the sclera very thick and tough. If it were all like that, then no light would be able to enter the eyeball. And one of the inner layers of the eyeball, called the retina, is where we're going to have the photoreceptors, the cells that detect photons of light for vision. So part of what we call the fibrous tunic, and I'm just going to write this out, I'm going to discuss it now while we're at it. The fibrous tunic, the eye has what we call 3 major coats or layers or tunics, okay? The fibrous tunic, it's called the fibrous tunic because it's mostly dense connective tissue. The sclera is a major player, but near the front of the eye, there's a part where the sclera, the collagen fibers in the sclera, instead of crisscrossing, all start to line up so perfectly that light can penetrate. And this bulging section of the sclera that sticks out is called the cornea. And where the 2 meet, this little border where the sclera and the cornea meet is called the limbus, or the corneal limbus, okay? So The fibrous tunic contains a layer of dense connective tissue that's very thick and tough called the sclera. The function of the sclera is a point of attachment for the extraocular muscles so that when they pull, it doesn't rip the tissue. That's why we have some strong connective tissue there. It also provides some shape and support for the eyeball and makes it very tough. The cornea is a transparent portion of the sclera that allows light to enter the front of the eye. If you're going to try to follow me, I've already skipped a little bit of page 11. We're going to come back to this in just a moment, but we're doing the bottom of page 11. The fibrous tunic is mostly sclera. It's a dense layer of connective tissue, or layer of dense connective tissue, that provides shape and support for the eye, and is a point of attachment for what we call the extrinsic or extraocular muscles of the eye. And then the cornea is a transparent portion of or translucent portion of the fibrous tunic that allows photons of light to enter the front of the eye. If a photon of light were shot at the eyeball and it hit the sclera, it would bounce off. But when it hits the cornea, it penetrates and enters the eye. So that's the function of the cornea, to let light enter into the front of the eye. I'm not going to draw the cornea on here. Now, the next layer of the eyeball is going to be called the vascular tunic. Every time you hear certain words in anatomy and physiology, your brain should immediately jump to other things. When you hear the term vascular, you start to think of blood vessels. So the vascular tunic is going to have a lot of blood vessels in it. Some of those blood vessels are going to penetrate the eye through the optic nerve and then fan out on the inside here in a network or a complex layer of blood vessels. That layer of blood vessels is called the choroid coat, or the choroid tunic, and that's part of the vascular tunic of the eye. There's more structures that are part of the vascular tunic. Excuse me. So, the choroid coat is blood vessels, and those blood vessels allow blood flow into the eye to deliver nutrients and ions and things for all the neurons inside the eye, and feed them all those nutrients and ions. They dump their waste into it, and then that fluid is going to be reabsorbed and taken back out of the eyeball. So it allows blood flow to the eye to supply the eye with nutrients and ions and wash away waste. Now, the other parts of the vascular tunic are several-fold. Now, before I'm trying to do two things at once here, because in order for you to understand what we're looking at here, I kind of need this drawing. One of the structures that's part of the vascular tunic is this large muscular structure called a ciliary muscle. The ciliary muscle hangs down inside the eye and sticks up from the bottom. Actually, it's a ring-shaped muscle. We're looking at a round muscle like this, but we've cut it in half, we've sliced it, and we're seeing it from this view. So we're seeing the top part and the bottom part, but it's really part of a round muscle. I'm going to redraw this and relabel it in a little bit, but that ciliary muscle is going to contain or hold on to these tiny little ligaments, these little pieces of connective tissue, and they're going to suspend the lens. Those little pieces of connective tissue are called suspensory ligaments. They suspend the lens, and then this structure would be the lens inside the eye. And the ciliary muscle controls the shape of the lens so we can focus at different distances. I'm going to go over all that stuff with you again in just a moment. I'm trying to get to this structure. There's another structure that's part of the vascular tunic. And by the way, the ciliary muscle, the suspensory ligaments, and the lens are collectively known as the ciliary body. Okay? There's another structure that hangs off of that. That's a muscular structure that hangs down like this. And that structure is called the iris. And that's what I'm trying to get to. The iris has a hole in it called the pupil. And as light enters the front of the eye, any photons of light that hit the iris are blocked from entering into the eye. So as light enters the cornea, if it passes through the pupil, it will be focused back onto the retina. So the iris is a muscular structure that's going to regulate the amount of light that enters into the back of the eyeball, because too many photons of light, too bright of a light, will blind you. You can't see well in too bright or too dark of a light. This muscle is going to control the size of the pupil to control how much light is entering the eyeball. Now, the reason I do all that is because I'm not going to draw the cornea. We're going to look right through the cornea, and we're going to see the structure that provides your eye color, which is called the iris, as a ring-shaped structure. If you have blue eyes, it's the blue part of your eyes. If you have brown eyes, it's the brown part of the eye. And there will be some little lines running out from the iris this way, all the way around. And the hole in the middle of the iris, I'm going to put the little letter P here, is called the pupil. Okay, the pupil is a hole in the iris that lets light into the back of the eyeball. The iris has muscles that can constrict or dilate, regulating that light. So when we look at the front of the eye, we're really seeing sort of several parts of these two layers. Again, I'm going to go back over these layers and we're going to write out all the details in a little bit. But I wanted to give you some of this basic anatomy. We have the sclera, the cornea, which we're looking through to see the iris and the pupil at the front of the eye. We have the superior and inferior palpebra, the lateral, and the medial canthus where they meet. Now, over by the medial canthus, there will be a gritty, squishy little pink organ-like looking thing that you'll see here. And that structure can, well, we'll talk about its functions a little bit later. But for now, I want to focus on the eyeball itself. Now, one of the things that happens, and one of the reasons I'm drawing all of this, is to give you this anatomy so we can talk about tears. We're going to jump around a little bit in the note set, but I'll get to that in just a moment. Just follow along. Usually sitting superior and a little lateral to the eye and deep to the skin, but up here by the eyelid, is a gland called a lacrimal gland. Lacrima in Latin and lagrima in many Spanish languages, Portuguese and Spanish and stuff, can mean tear. And so the lacrimal gland really is the tear gland. Coming out of the lacrimal gland will be some little channels called lacrimal ducts. And those little lacrimal ducts would eventually run through the eyelid or behind it and release tears onto the surface of the eye. Now, we are secreting tears 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We just don't realize it. And what happens is, as we're making and secreting the tears, when we blink, that wipes the tears over the surface of the eye. One of the functions of tears is to keep the surface of the eyeball moist. If you blow air across your eyes, if you held your eyes open and stared at a fan, your eyeballs would dry out and start to itch and be uncomfortable. So we moisten our eyeballs by blinking and wiping tears over them. A second function of tears is that tears can wash away any debris or irritants. If something starts irritating your eye, you will hypersecrete tears, and they'll start to wash away all that trash and debris. So now, a third function of tears is tears contain an enzyme called lysozyme. To lyse means to digest or break, and zyme means it's an enzyme. Lysozyme is an enzyme that is in tears that has antimicrobial properties. It can help break down or digest and kill certain bacteria and some viruses. Our eyeball, by the way, is a huge avenue for viruses and bacteria. If you've ever seen someone sneeze under a black light, we will blow this mist of microscopic droplets all over the place, upwards to 10 to 25 feet around our body. So if someone sneezes at the mall and you're walking through it, you might get a microscopic droplet that has some virus or bacteria in it and pick up an infection. That's why we tend to wear face shields in surgery and things. So anyway, it's also why you should cover your nose and things when you sneeze so that you're not spreading viruses like the coronavirus. Anyway, sorry. So now, when tears are being secreted, the reason we're not aware of them is they get wicked over by the palpebrae to the medial canthus and to a structure over here called the lacus lacrimalis or lacrimal lake. I forget what the actual term is, but it doesn't matter. If we look very carefully at the eyelids under a microscope, you'll see two tiny little pores, like someone punctured the eyelid. Those openings are called a lacrimal punctum. Puncta would be plural. And the tears are going to run over the eyeball and drain through the lacrimal punctum. Now, if you look at the models in lab, what you'll notice is there are these slight little structure that sits over here underneath our skin that will have a hole or opening in the bottom that will drain into our nasal cavities. These little channels happen to be called lacrimal canals. And some books will use the term lacrimal canaliculus, which means little canals. And as the tears drain through these canals, they get collected in this large structure called the lacrimal sac, and then through a little tube called the nasolacrimal duct into our nasal passageways. Which, by the way, if you look in my notes set on one of the pages, I believe it's page 12, I think it says, list the structures in correct order through which tears would flow. And let me see. Excuse me, I had an interruption there that threw me off a little bit. I apologize. Yeah, it's on page 11. List the structures in order that tears would flow through. Well, first is lacrimal gland. Second is the lacrimal ducts. Third would be the lacrimal punctum. Fourth would be the lacrimal canals. Fifth would be the lacrimal sac. Sixth would be the nasolacrimal duct. And then we reabsorb the tears into our nasal passages. Because of the enzymes and other things present in tears, the salts, it will irritate your nose. So when we secrete too many tears, it can sometimes irritate the nose, and then your nose starts to run, the mucus trying to flush things out. Now, we're not aware of the tears usually because we are secreting them at the exact same rate that we reabsorb them. When we become either very emotional or something is irritating the eye or damages the eye, we can hypersecrete tears, and we'll secrete them faster than these little tiny drains can drain them, and the tears will run over the edge of the palpebra and down your face. So I wanted to talk about the structures of tear formation, where we secrete tears and where we reabsorb them and their flow through here. Now I'm going to do another drawing in just a moment, but I'm going to stop this video for now, and I'm going to go through all the later. Well, I'll stop the video in a moment, but I'm going to go through some other structures and some other things in the note set, and then we'll get into the coats of the eye and get into their great detail. So if you're following along in my note set when it comes to vision on page 11, there's a few definitions. Number one, you need to review the anatomy of the eye. We've done some of it here. We'll do some more in just a moment. There's some definitions. You need to know what a chalazion is. You need to know what a stye is, and it asks you to define lysozyme. Now, one of the structures it asks about is what is the palpebral and the ocular conjunctiva. So think about this, okay? I'm going to erase this drawing, and I'm going to redraw it without all the extra stuff on it real quick because I want to show you something really interesting. As your eyeball comes down towards the front and the cornea bulges out, so this would be part of your sclera and your cornea at the front of the eye. Your eyelids would be sitting here like this. There's some eyelashes sticking off. Now, there's a very thin membrane that coats the visible outer surface of the eye, and it sits right on the sclera and the cornea. It is a single layer of squamous epithelium. It's simple squamous epithelium. That layer is called the ocular conjunctiva, or some people say conjunctiva, conjunctiva. It's the ocular conjunctiva. That exact same membrane is going to fold back and lie up against to and eventually blend into the epithelium on the back of the eyelid. But since it's on the back of the eyelid, we call that the palpebral conjunctiva. It is a single layer of squamous epithelium, and the ocular conjunctiva actually coats or covers the visible outer surface of the eye. So if you're trying to put a contact lens in and you touch the surface of your eyeball, you're not physically touching the cornea directly, you're touching the ocular conjunctiva on the surface of the eye. That would be like me putting saran wrap over a window. I wouldn't be touching the glass, I'd be touching the saran wrap. Now, a couple of things. Number one, if you do wear contacts and one gets stuck up in your eyelid, people start to panic and think, oh my God, it's going to get behind my eyeball and damage my brain. Well, it can't. That contact lens gets stuck up here and it can't go back behind your eyeball. So the conjunctiva covers the entire outer surface of the eye and the back of the eyelids, and it's almost like a barrier to prevent physical debris and things from getting back into the eye. Okay? When the conjunctiva gets irritated, it gets inflamed. As you know, itis is inflammation, so we can develop what's called conjunctivitis. Okay? Now, conjunctivitis is just inflammation, a redness and swelling of the conjunctiva. And because we have these blood vessels on the surface of the eye start to dilate, The red against the white sclera starts to look like a pinkish color. So another term for conjunctivitis is pink eye. One of the things I like to address, by the way, and people get wrong, is not all pink eye is contagious. If the pink eye or conjunctivitis is caused by physical damage, like you scratch your eyeball or some sand gets in it, that's not contagious. It will get inflamed, it will get conjunctivitis, but it's due to physical damage, like an abrasion. If it's due to bacteria, if someone doesn't wash their hands and there's bacteria or virus on their hands, if someone goes to the restroom, doesn't wash their hands, they touch something, you touch that, then you scratch your eyeball, you might transfer some bacteria or viral material onto the surface of the eye and it gets inflamed. Conjunctivitis that's due to the presence of pathogens is contagious. If you touch your eye, it's going to cause someone else to get it if they touch that same thing. Okay, so know that about conjunctivitis, know when it is and when it is not contagious. Okay, and then we listed the structures in order through which tears would flow. So that's going to get us through the initial portion of some of the anatomy of the eye and some interesting stuff. I'll ask you about the order of the flow of tears. I'll ask you about some of the layers of the eyeball, but I hope that helps you get oriented. I'm going to stop this video here. I'm sorry for the interruption. I hope I can edit it out, but if you see this gap, my son went for a run and he came in and was knocking on the door, so I apologize. I'm going to try to edit that out. So if you see a stop in the video and it picks back up, it's because I figured out how to do some editing, some trimming of the video. I've been working on that, trying to get smarter. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'll see you on the flip side of the next video.